Welcome to Tips for the Transition, where we have deep, meaningful conversations about life. We talk about how significant changes like divorce, grief, and career change can affect us, our family, our relationships, and our work, and how to move beyond them. I'm your host, Maria Tomás-Keegan, certified career and life coach for women, and I'm here to support you through the messy seasons of life so you can answer big questions like who am I now and how do I move on from here? If you're ready to consider new options, be inspired, and meet incredible women who are on this life journey with us, you're in the right place. You'll find something in each episode to give you hope and encourage you to move from panic to powerful, from rocky to resilient, and from upside down to right side up. This is Tips for the Transition. Hello, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan. I'm your host and a career and life coach for women. There are a couple of things that I love about serving professional women. First, I love to help you create a life and career that fulfills you because you don't deserve to stay stuck where you don't belong. And secondly, I love introducing you to fabulous women on this show because they are on a similar mission. My inspiring guests are both role models and resources to help you explore different aspects of career transition and different techniques and tips, and they bring them all to you on this show. So if something hits the mark, it resonates with you, and you'd like more information, be sure to check out the show notes below for all the ways to connect with us or follow us or subscribe. And if you'd like to leave a comment, we would love to hear your feedback. All right. So as I often do on this show, I start out by asking you a question.
Okay.
So are you a doer? Are you a workaholic? Maybe you don't call yourself that, but maybe you think that you are. Do you feel guilty when you're not busy accomplishing something, doing something? Well, my guest calls herself an action addict. And we're going to talk about what kind of doer you might be and where the obsession with being in constant action can lead. Renee Dineen has her master's in organizational psychology and is an international thought leader playing at the intersection of business, leadership, psychology, and well-being. I love that. That's a great intersection to be at.
Mm.
Before launching her coaching and consulting practice, Renee spent 20 years in global senior leadership roles in high-tech and biotech industries. She dedicates her career to exploring human nature so that she can understand how we can live with greater purpose, joy, and grace. Now, who doesn't want more of that? Renee has presented on dozens of global stages, been the guest on numerous podcasts, and been featured in publications like Fortune and Financial Times and Elephant Journal and Ladder's Career Magazine. And in 2020, in February, Renee took her story to the TEDx stage. Her talk, titled Authentic Inaction, Undoing the Doing in a Do Crazy World, shares her trials and tribulations as a doing addict and a workaholic. And her message has reached over 600,000 views, and it supports her mission to revolutionize how we work, play, and relate to one another and our purpose.
Mm.
So let's talk with Renee about this idea of undoing the doing in a do crazy world.
Hi, everybody. I'll just have to say, when people read my bio and I'm here live, I say, yeah, there she is, the doing addict. So So I look
Yeah.
forward to unpacking that, and just to open, right? What I'm not saying is do nothing. So, but I'm saying to reorient your relationship to your doing life so that it's healthy and intentional.
There you go. All right. So let's start by learning a little bit more about you calling yourself a doing addict. What does that mean? And why do you call yourself that?
Yeah. So, for those who suffer from different types of addictions, please know how absolutely thoughtful I was in choosing the word addiction for myself, and really for my message. Um, and why that word is how I named myself is because my doing life had me. I didn't have it. And by that, I mean, I had lost my ability to choose for myself, whether I said yes or I said no. The answer was almost always, if not always, yes. Raise my hand for a new project, say yes to a social engagement. It didn't matter if I wanted to go or not. I had lost my ability to tune in to my deeper desires, my more authentic voice that would allow me to choose. And so it became an addiction that actually resulted in um, a lot of, it sort of started taking more than it was giving about 7, 8, 10 years ago, and manifested itself physically, where I had developed a stutter and a tremor in my right hand. And my doctor thought I had multiple sclerosis, and thankfully I didn't, but I had done that to myself. I had overworked my entire adrenal system, and nervous system was completely breaking down, and my health was deeply at risk. So it was at that time that I really had to pause and see how my doing life was serving me and how it wasn't.
Wow. That's scary to have developed symptoms that could have been uh,
Warded off
diagnosed
earlier, yes, way
as
earlier.
something way worse than what you were struggling with. But I can imagine how that could take you down a rabbit hole, right?
Yeah. Who am I
So,
without my doing? I mean, my whole identity was wrapped up in what I achieved.
yeah, yeah. So I'm curious because I know where mine comes from. Um, have you thought about, or have you explored? I'm sure you have. Have you explored from where it stems for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. I think we're going to get into the 5 different types of doers later, but for me, it was very well modeled. It was definitely, I don't know if I want to say genetic, but a family trait. Both my parents were workaholics. My mother
Hmm.
is still 77, works 50, 60 hours a week. So it was well modeled. I started to notice I was raising, particularly my daughter, whose personality is more similar to mine than my son. I was raising another active doer. And the message I was sending to myself and to her and to others was that really I was complicit in being a leader that projected success as constantly overdoing.
Hmm.
And, at this moment in time, I refused to live my life one more day, representing that as success. The other thing I will just say is that there is a societal addiction, and I know I'm not alone. And in the world, doers are really admired. They're
Yeah.
recognized, they're
Yeah.
honored, they're revered. And so to undo the doing for me wasn't really, I had to break a systemic bias that I had been a part of and that I helped to create. And in that, breaking the addiction, for me, I did have to leave my corporate setting. I was ready to anyway. So I don't want to blame corporate, although corporate doesn't make it easy. So if you have that propensity to do for whatever reason, and I'll describe some of those reasons later, for me, I was avoiding some bigger questions in my life. I was avoiding boredom, just being still.
Ah, okay.
And the identity and value that I placed on, pausing and rest and
Mm,
sleep. I was a chronic insomniac. So I had devalued everything that would have served me earlier in my journey, and it not becoming an addiction, but really a strength, because it can still be a strength without becoming an addiction. But I ignored all that.
right. Okay.
I didn't
Wow.
know any other way. I really didn't.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that because I think the environment in which we are raised and the models that we see around us very often are what are how we learn to
Mhm.
be.
That's right.
So let's talk about this. I talk about this with my clients a lot about the difference between doing and being. I want to talk about that with you because I think you have a unique perspective on this. And it can cause some tension, it can cause some resistance.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Well, first, a funny story, because people ask me, oh, did you become a doing addict in your working life? And I have to say no, because one of my best friends from college got me a book for my birthday one time, and it went on my coffee table, and it was The Art of Being, and I was maybe 20. So this addiction has been with me a long time. I ignored the book for many years, but now it's on my nightstand, and I leave it there as a gentle reminder to myself that I'm always going to be in recovery, because this has kind of always been a part of me. So yeah, what's the tension? For me, the tension was, while we absolutely make an impact on the world by taking action, our actions should really be more of a natural extension of who we are. Instead, what we do has become the definition of who we are. We need to flip that back. Who am I? And therefore, what should I do? And that's the connection I had lost. And that's the tension for me, is that I believed that my true identity was this overachiever, go-getter, goal checker, task do master, multitasker. I was a mom and an executive, and it just, all my roles, it followed me everywhere. And what I didn't realize was how that doing kept me small, kept me in check, really limited the expression of who I was, who I really am, which is so much more than what I do. So that's for me, the tension between the being and the doing, is that my doing defined my being instead of my being defining my doing.
I love that. And it's a great distinction. And it the way you expressed the doing part, it felt to me, and I've been guilty of this several times in my life, that we are living up to other people's expectations of us.
Yeah.
And what happens when we do that, and that's all we do, right, is try to keep everybody else happy, live up to what other people expect us to do, keep climbing the ladder because it's expected, that we end up compromising our own values and our own identity.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I like you said the danger in that is that you will let yourself and others down, because you can only show up not as you are for so long. They call it a midlife crisis. They call it a nervous breakdown. They call it a burnout. All sorts of words for it. What happened is that you lost your ability to choose. You gave up your power to something.
Right.
Yeah. And
you've lost who you are. Right. So you call this an addiction for you. I don't know that I would have called it that for me. Never thought of it that way. But as I think about the way I behaved, I can see why you would think of it that way. So, and I know that addictions are very hard to break. Had a few of my own. So why is this one so hard to break?
Well, beyond, if it was role modeled for you, or if for the majority of your life you've been affirmed for that. And, again, this isn't about blame. I could think back to early childhood experiences initially around grades or sports. I'm a parent. I know sometimes I still, and I wouldn't say I'm defining you, child, by what you do, but right, like I associate the outcome of a good grade, right, with efforts that they took, or we often see it kind of more simply, as opposed to like, this is just something, a grade. Okay, so they get a C or something, right? And so what was going on? If they were putting effort into other places, it's not like they would just drop the ball here. So for me, it kind of just like, it was all or nothing. I either did everything or did nothing. And so for me, the addiction became, if you, let's say if you're resonating with this message, but you're wondering like, am I just a good doer or is it an addiction? I think that's what you're asking. And so for me, the difference is, do you raise your hand at work to pick up a project, even though you absolutely have no time, and potentially even other balls are starting to drop, right? Do you say yes to a friend to go work out in the morning when what you really want to do, if you were just taking that moment, and I call that authentic inaction, just for a moment, pausing long enough to create a little distance so that you can choose between the stimulus and your response. And in that inaction, it could be a second, mostly it's a couple seconds, or it could be a day, an hour, a month, depending how big the decision is, but that you are always in choice. And you don't rely on that habitual response, which for me was hand up, yes, sure, see you there, that I would say, do I want to do that? Right? And just give myself a pause and be, yeah, I do want to do that. And I'm all in. And one of my keynotes is about this idea of learning to say no. For you, it may be that simple. You just don't feel comfortable saying no. And I'm going to save some of my tips because that's generally a big challenge for people that crosses other topics other than being a doing addict. But this inability to say no and giving up your right to choose, yes or no. But the talk is titled, learning to say no so we can say hell yes. And that is really reserving your best time and energy and heartfelt desires and intentions to do the things you want to do will get you the outcomes that you desire. You will be fulfilled. And one of those other watch outs is, no matter what you do, are you fulfilled? Are you fulfilled? Do you do something and feel the sweetness of that achievement? Do you witness yourself in that event, or that yes that you said? Do you witness yourself and do you feel pride, right? Does it fulfill you? And for me, it's like, no matter what I did, it was never enough. I was never fulfilled, no matter how much I did. And that was really scary for me.
Yeah, and often that kind of creeps up on us too. We are we're such good doers, right? That we just keep doing.
Yeah.
And we don't realize until something happens. And usually I think it's, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a place where you don't know who you are anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's something to try to avoid, but very often that's the trigger that will get us to stop and actually assess what's going on.
Yeah.
So I know you talk about different kinds of doers. I'd love to quickly go through some of those. Would you share some of those with us?
Yeah. I focused in on 5 for my TED Talk. One that's digestible as 3 to 5. More than 5 people forget. So
Yeah.
there might be more, but I think I've caught like 80% of them in these 5. So the first one is, the achieving doer, the one whose identity, similar to mine, I relate to this doer a lot, whose identity is, there is no distinction between who they are and what they do. And that drive to do and achieve that next goal becomes completely visceral for them. They know no other way. They wake up in the morning, it's like, what am I going to accomplish today? These are the folks who during COVID launched a podcast, wrote a book, and started a company. Those are my achieving doers. And the next one is the avoiding doer. So the one who's sort of putting off the bigger, harder, more challenging things in life. And by keeping busy, staying distracted, staying kind of lost in that noise. Controlling doer. These are the ones who aren't necessarily the most patient, potentially, and it's just easier for them to do it because it gets done faster, quicker, likely in the way that they want, right? So it becomes a need for control to be the one that is always doing. The fourth one is the perfecting doer. This one likes to do because they're afraid other people won't do it to the quality that they want, and they want it to be of high quality all the time, right? They've kind of lost that ability to discern between good enough And so their perfecting orientation keeps them in that do hustle. And then the last big one is the supporting doer. And this is also called the people pleaser, right? The one who kind of knows what you need before you need it and is doing it for you. And they begin then to become that person that is known for doing for others constantly and at the expense of their own, desires and needs. So those are kind of 5, and those start to, I'm trying to be succinct, kind of, you could think of them as archetypes or motivations that keep that doing addiction in place.
As you were describing them, I was thinking about who I know who fits into those categories or those archetypes. And a couple of leaders in my past corporate life came to mind for a couple of them, and they modeled for their team, right? So there's the micromanager, right? That's one of it's what you might call the doer who
the controlling doer.
Wants to control everything, right? So to our audience, you might want to rewind and listen to those again, make some notes about which one you resonate most with. Who are you a doer, and which kind are you? And I think that I'm more than one of those. So I call myself a recovering perfectionist. And recovering, I had a PhD in procrastination and a master's in perfectionism a while back. And
I love that, and I hate it for you.
I know. But I mean, I've been working on it, and that's the point I want to make. Recognizing that this is a condition that you want to change. Recognizing that you have it first, and that it's not serving you well, and you want to change it. It takes time.
Yeah, sure does.
To make the changes that you want to make. So help me understand why you think, and in your experience, why do people get stuck in this trap of doing too much and kind of stay there? Why do you think that is?
Gosh, well, I know I stayed stuck because honestly, I didn't know there was any other way to show up as Renee. That version of Renee had been affirmed loud and clear. And by the way, the money was great. The accolades were awesome. The trips were beautiful, right? I was doing really cool things. I was out there, in my version, but I was living my best life. And what I also started then to realize is that I wasn't able to stay present at the dinner table. I lost my ability to fall asleep on my own. So all these other things got kicked up before my tremor and my stutter. What you noted earlier is very true. I could have paid attention to those signals much earlier. And had I had a talk like this out there, obviously my 20-year-old friend gave me The Art of Being. It's obviously an early signal that would have warded off lots of pain and suffering and lots of bad role modeling. But for me, I just didn't know any other way. I didn't know who I'd be without the doing. I have a real fear of missing out. FOMO is real for those of us that relate to that term. And so I had associated me saying no with me missing out on something, right? The whole construct of it was so locked in my head, how I was defining value, how I was defining living your best life. Like it was all related. And if you're looking at those 5 doers and starting to unpack, and by the way, I relate at some time to all of them. My guess is if you dove into, let's say, your controlling doer, your perfecting doer, that if you unpacked her a bit more and really looked at how that is serving you and how it wasn't, like that will bring value to all parts of your life. And so I started to see that, like, if I could break my addiction to doing, I could become more present. If I could break my addiction to doing, I could be more patient with my kids. If I broke my addiction to doing, I could sleep better, right? So I started to create a different value construct around my doing life where saying no became really key.
I love that. I love that.
I love saying no now. I'm like, no, Megan Trainor's song. I
Yeah,
adore it. I dance to it. Like it's so empowering because I know when I say no to something, I get to say heck yes to something else and give it my best.
exactly. And the whole idea of setting boundaries for ourselves to protect our energy, which
Yeah.
is not in unlimited supply,
No,
right?
ma'am.
And being at our best for those that we care most about, right? You said you were not present at dinner. That's not okay for your family, right? It's not
That's
okay. But we have to recognize those things. We have to become aware, and then we have to make some concerted conscious effort to choose how to change that.
yeah.
So, what are some of the ways that we could better align with who we are, and what we do?
Well, if you've never done a deep dive into yourself, and you can do that with a tool like the Enneagram or other tools out there that kind of hold a mirror and help you see yourself in a more expansive way. Start there. Who am I really? Because so I'll say for me, I'll use the Enneagram as an example. For those of you that follow that, my dominant type is called the enthusiast, right? Inherently, my personality wants to do fun things, wants to be out in the world, wants movement and momentum and action. And so, that's already, I don't want to say a tick against me because there's beauty in that those parts of me as well. But I know that that's already in me. So I'm going to need to also refine kind of my day-to-day life, how I show up, how I think about the world, how I tap into my strengths and limitations. So the first would be like, get to know yourself better. The second would be just to kind of step back and reflect on whether or not your doing life has moved into a more addictive state or whether it's still really benefiting you, and to do that honestly. And for me, I started to care more, like, can I be present? And one, just noticing like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about my phone, or I'm wondering what's going on over there rather than being fully present here. And that started to bother me. So the it's not a watch out. Maybe it's just you're on the right track. If you're starting to become aware of things and they start to kind of bring you pain, right? Like, oh my gosh, how many dinners have I sat here and not been present at all with my children? And what message did they take in as a result of that? So when you raise that awareness, like you do with anything you're trying to shift or change, some of it's going to be hard to look at. And so, certainly be kind with yourself as well on that journey. I still am. I've had some events that have happened to me since I became aware that my doing was really more of an addiction that had me and I didn't have it. And those life events kind of also, I feel like I trust the universe, and I feel like things happen. Like doing my TED talk, people have said, is that just another thing to do? And I said, no, that was me taking authentic action. I chose that. And I chose that, one, because I think the message can relieve suffering. And I also chose it to help me stay in recovery. And so take the actions that are authentic for you, because what's at risk for me and is at risk for you if you're saying yes to things you don't want to do is that you're not showing up in the world authentically. And so I just started to care more about that, really just switching the way I was seeing it totally on its backside.
Yeah, yeah, it's flipping it so that you see things. I love it. What comes to mind is one of my very favorite quotes from Wayne Dyer. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Mm,
So when you flip something on its head, and that means, sometimes it means you and everything inside of you, right? The way you've looked at things in the past that has caused you to behave the way you behave, the
yeah.
beliefs you hold, right? That may have been taught to you from early childhood, and you've just kind of drug them with you. You've
Mm-hmm.
worn them like, very well used clothes that you don't want to get rid of because you're afraid of what else might be there instead.
Yeah.
But when you put yourself in that mode of making choices for yourself, it's so empowering. I am so happy that you talked about that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So let's relate back to your life. Tell us what is different
Hmm.
for you in your life today after having broken the addiction. And I know you keep saying you are still in recovery. Well, I know that about perfectionism too. I have to constantly remind myself that that's not who I am anymore. How
Hmm.
how have things changed for you?
Oh my goodness. Well, in my relationships, I was always overstretched, always overbooked. I was showing up haphazardly. Um, I could never flake as well. Like if I said yes, I could never unwind it later. Now I realize like stuff happens. Like give people grace if they have to change plans. And I don't mean like career flakes, right? People who always flake, but things happen, and we have to give people a break, and commitments do get broken. But for me, I think my quality of my relationships, when I am on a trip with girlfriends, or I am visiting a school with my son, or I am having dinner with a friend, or I'm watching TV with my kids, or whatever, I'm fully there. It was like a muscle I had lost. It was like I was running a triathlon and I got the running and biking right, but I didn't know how to run, right? So I really have brought that back into my many gifts and talents and ways that I want to show up in the world. So my relationships have shifted significantly. I feel like people know me better, really, who I am. Like every time I say no, I give a message about who I am and what's important to me. And when I say yes now, that message is clear too. So I feel like people also know who I am. Sleep is much better. I would say I still am not a great sleeper, but I've also shifted my relationship to sleep, the value that I place on precious sleep. So that has shifted everything: my patience, how I show up, my health, my energy. And then in my working life, and this is, I ended up going out on my own about 7 years ago. And of course, the fear is always like, oh, can I go out on my own? Can I still keep my lifestyle? All of that are real concerns. But I think for me, this idea of like, will I be able to say no? Will I have the courage and the clarity to say no to clients for work that I don't want to do? And if I was leaving a great job, which I did, that I loved, but I loved the idea of something else more. Um, I I didn't want it to be for naught, and I didn't want to just fall back into the same trap. So I feel like I'm really able to show up and do my biggest work in the world and be on purpose in that and deliver value and make the contributions that I desire. So for me, that's very significant. And, obviously you look back on your life and you see the impact that you've had, but I just feel like I've set myself up to have the impacts that I want and to live more on purpose. And
I love that. To live more on purpose.
mhm.
Something else you said that I love, figuring out what you value most and how you place value on the choices you get to make.
Yeah.
What's important to you now? Not what used to be important to you, not what's important to someone else, but what's important to you now. So
Yeah.
when I work with my clients, there are, three big questions, and you're talking all around them. We're talking right at them. Who are you now that things are changing for you? What do you value most? And what do you
Mhm.
want? Right? Three
Mhm.
big questions. And I think if you can dig to answer those, either with the help of the Enneagram or with a coach like Renee or me, or there's so many of us out here that could help trying trying to figure out the answer to those questions, I think is really important. And the value question, I
Yeah.
think, is foundational.
Yeah. Thank you for hearing that, because your previous question around how do you align who you are with what you do, and this was one of those painful moments for me, is that my values haven't changed, but I wasn't living them. Authenticity, connection, relationships. Yes,
Yeah.
achievement was a value. Actually, it's not in my top 5 anymore. But
Um,
I again, I was thinking, oh my God, I'm not being authentic. Like what? Like, right? Like, might as well just like put a knife in my belly and turn.
yeah.
And so I think that is part of why I realized like, oh, I've lost connection to who I am. Is if I went, went to heaven tomorrow, would I be pleased with how I ended? And I said, no, I wouldn't, because it wasn't really me. It wasn't the whole me. So my values were also a good check-in for me. And I would say,
Yeah.
that's your conscience speaking. And when
Yeah.
one of those values becomes at risk, and for me, health was one. That's why the well-being is also a value for me, overall health and well-being. And so when that became at risk, I don't know why that was the one that woke me up, but it did. But my other values were already at risk. And I just ignored it because the accolades felt better.
Yeah.
I
So
traded them.
you put more value on the accolades than
Yes,
you did on your own overall well-being. And
absolutely.
that's where I think we just have to stop. And I call it the power of the pause.
Mm-hmm.
When we take a pause and just really honestly look at what's going on in our lives and how we are responding to everything that's going on, and are we happy with
Yeah.
that?
And
Are
are we
we do we
happy?
feel, you said it before, do we feel fulfilled by what we're doing, who we are, how we're being?
Yeah.
And if the answer to any of those is, not so much anymore, then
Mm-hmm.
it's time to really start taking a look, because we have so many options and choices.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say, we don't have to stay stuck where we don't belong. We don't have to. We have choices and options. All
Yeah.
right. So we've gotten to I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd say something similar to that. Like, suffering is often optional.
Yeah.
Sometimes suffering is, you got to just suffer, work through it, figure out what it wants to teach you. But we suffer so unnecessarily.
Yeah. Sometimes we do. And we bring it upon ourselves when we
Yeah.
don't have to do that. Yeah. That's so true. All right. So we've come to towards the end of our show, and the last segment is always where I ask my guests to share some practical tips and strategies with us, some great takeaways for our audience. It's why I call the show Tips for the Transition. So, Renee, what's your
Hmm.
first tip?
If you are resonating with this message and you feel that you may have a doing addiction that has started to serve you less, or maybe it's never served you, that's fair too. Start to really tune into your belly. For me, I really expanded my appreciation for my somatic intelligence, and usually my belly knew to say no, but my mind overrided it. And I now listen first. Like, if I get that little oh, don't do it, Renee, don't say no, right? I trust it immensely. So trust that, whether you call that your instinct or your belly or your felt sense, really develop the muscle to tune in there. And I really feel like that will serve you in a bunch of other places as well.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, right?
And
So a lot of people say trust your gut. So I call it your inner wisdom, because it's never ever wrong
that's
if
right.
you learn to listen and heed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some people would say,
yeah.
like, you get a flash of heat, or maybe your jaw gets
Right,
tight,
we feel it
or
somewhere,
they say
right?
that. Exactly. You feel it somewhere. Your
Yeah,
body's saying, please say no.
yeah, yeah,
The other is to shift, this really idea of shifting your relationship to the word no. And we're taught that no is selfish, or no one will respect my no, and that's just not true. No is honest. No is thoughtful. People will respect your no, and I think that you don't have to justify it. If no is your answer, we teach people how to work with us, and so know that they will honor your no. At least go into believing they will honor your no, and if they're not honoring your no, get curious about that. But majority of the time, that's on them, not on you. Sometimes maybe at work or something, you're like, okay, how can we make this work, right, where I can still stay in check and do this authentically. So that would be a second piece of advice: is what's your
I,
relationship with no?
yeah. I think that's great. It's a great way to just kind of check in on yourself
Yeah.
as well. And no no doesn't have to be an absolute either.
No doesn't mean never.
It doesn't mean never.
Mm,
Exactly. It can be no, not now. No, not until I've replenished myself and I have the energy to help you.
yeah.
I can do it not today, but tomorrow. No does not have to be absolute.
I love that. You're absolutely right. No does not mean never. And actually, no becomes a point of negotiation.
Exactly.
But at
Exactly.
least you set a line and you're in choice.
Yeah.
And then, of
Yeah.
course, we don't want to be stubborn, right? And resistant and rigid.
Right.
Um,
It's an opportunity for compromise and collaboration, and those are good things.
those are great things.
Yeah. Okay.
And then
Would
one
you?
last tip, which is, unfortunately, no one is going to do this work for you because the world wants you to say yes. Look at the number of books that say yes versus no, that teach us to say yes versus no. And it's not balanced. And so the world wants you to say yes. And you probably have a lifetime of saying yes, and for various reasons that have kept that yes in place. But this is work for you. But I promise you, oh my gosh, it's such a worthy road to travel. It's the road less traveled. Those who learn get really good at no or saying yes to the right things. That's what I want to say too. I don't just sit on the couch and say a bunch of no's, but when I say yes, I'm all in, and I've reflected on what's important to me, my authenticity, my health and well-being, my relationships, my desire to make an impact on the world. So I have my glasses that I put on now for my yeses or no's is clear. Before it was like God that only had one view in the theater. So I think that sounds exciting. And also give yourself a break. We're not always up for a big shift in our life, so timing is important, but the world won't make this one easy for you, but that doesn't matter because you can do it anyway.
Yeah. That's great advice. This does not. I wish it were this easy to flip a switch, right? And say, take a look at what's not working for you right now. And you may have been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
And it's not working for you now. It's really, you can't just flip a switch and make the change, make the shift.
Yeah.
It takes some time. It takes some introspection. It takes often, I like to say, don't do it alone. Surround yourself with the kind of people who can support you, the people you trust, who will tell you the truth, call you on your stuff, and help you move through this so that you can get better at honoring authentically who you are.
Yeah.
So that you can be your authentic self and be comfortable in that. And that comes along with saying yes and being all in, like you said, and saying no and feeling really comfortable about that.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. Renee, I've really enjoyed chatting with you here today.
Me too.
There's been some great stuff that we've talked about. I hope our audience think about what kind of doer they are so that they can, just kind of peel back the onion a little bit and see what's underneath that, what's driving that force, and see if that's really where you want to be.
Yeah.
And, I think about so many coaches and, my colleagues say, nothing happens until you take action. That's true, but it has to be inspired action.
That's right.
And what's required to make it inspired action is knowing who you are, why you're doing it, what you value, and that you put value on what you do. Love this conversation. So I know that people are going to want to reach out to you, Renee. What is the one best way for them to do that?
The one best way, probably reneedineen.com, because you'll have links there to my professional life, to my retreat life. I also have a passion for working with women like you do, and mothers and daughters as well, doing some healing work in that space. And then Authentic Inaction is my site dedicated to this topic. And I have curated hundreds of resources because I want the list of teaching us to say no to be at least equal to yes, if not even more prominent. So I have really scoured websites, books, articles, podcasts, and have put them all in one place under resources. So
that's fabulous. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you for making it easier for those of us who have, not witnessed your struggle, but now know about it. Thank you for doing that work and compiling all of that for us,
You're welcome.
curating all that information. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks. Bye. Good luck.
And for those in our audience, I want to thank you and tell you how much I appreciate that you are a part of our community. So if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a comment or a review. And if you have a star rating where you're listening or watching, pick a star. As I said at the top of the show, I love creating and sharing resources for professional women who feel stuck in their careers. So if something, if you feel stuck, if something has uh, caused you to think twice about what you're going through right now, and you'd like to get a fresh perspective on it, let's chat. Reach out to Renee or to me. All the links you need to connect with us are in the show notes below. And I invite you to continue the conversation in my private Facebook group called the Career Transition Roadmap. The link for that is below as well. So let's meet again here next Wednesday, same time, same place. Because you know what? I believe it's our time to thrive. So let's thrive together. Till next time, I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, helping you turn transition into triumph.